everyone, and welcome back to the next edition of Streamtime Sports. My name is Chris. I'm the community lead, and after some time, I'm very happy to say I'm back, joined as always by our CEO, Nick Meacham. And Nick, maybe some exciting news. You can fill the people in on why they've been having to wait a couple weeks to hear from you.
Yeah, I've been in limbo, so to speak, or migrating west from the UK. Rather random and a long story, but I've now found myself on Eastern Time, so USA Eastern Time, the same time zone as New York, but to most people's surprise, and my own as well, not in the US. In fact, I am now based in Jamaica for the near future, which is, it is as crazy as it sounds. I definitely didn't expect, if you told me a few months ago, before all this played out, that I would ever be living in the Caribbean, I would have laughed harder. Thought maybe in my 70s with all my billions saved up from all the success that sports pros had, that maybe I'd be retiring out here, but didn't expect to be out here now. But here I am. So I'm now sunning myself. Well, sunning myself is probably not the right word. I am now in the thick of a tropical storm in the capital city of Jamaica, settling into life after a couple of weeks of getting the family and a selection of belongings over this side of the world. So good to be here and good to be back on the pod with you again, Chris.
Well, you picked a perfect time to leave because we have hit full winter weather here in the UK. It's rainy, it's cold, it's awful, it's miserable. So apologies if I have very little sympathy for you having to move your life abroad to such a terrible place such as Jamaica.
Well, look, I normally rub it in your face that I've got beautiful blue skies, I've got beaches around the corner, etc. Except that I don't really have it. The storm here is, the rain is sideways. It's about to rain an inch in an hour, so 2.5 centimeters an hour, and the roads don't take it. So literally, there'll be flooding, there'll be mayhem. I am looking forward to dealing with all that shortly. And I'll tell you what, the driving here is something else. So you've got to be on your ball. So rain in the UK does not compare. There's probably more rain today in Jamaica than there will be for probably 6 to 12 months of the year in the UK, I would guess.
Fair play. And have you had any jerk chicken yet? Any local cuisine?
Well, at the moment, I'm based in the hotel. We are waiting for our place to be available to move into. So hopefully moving in this weekend. So plenty of jerk chicken, that's for sure. They love fried chicken over here, which is probably not a surprise for those who maybe are au fait with the cuisine over this part of the world. Lots of fried chicken, lots of jerk chicken. Bit of plantains, quite nice. My kids don't really get their head around the fact that you can fry a banana and it tastes the way it does. So a lot of those things. I'm looking forward to actually getting some vegetables into me, because apparently that's not a core cuisine over here so far that I've seen anyway.
Fair play. Well, there will be lots of interesting stories, I'm sure, over the coming episodes as you settle into life in Jamaica. I'll certainly mostly just be thinking about the beaches, and I like spicy food, so jerk chicken's good for me. Maybe some, rum punch on the side. Maybe we'll have a sports pro, Caribbean sometime. Just get the whole company out there. I'm sure all the execs in New York in the winter would like to come down. Maybe that's what we need to do. Sports pro Kingston.
You're not the first to suggest this since I've been talking to people both internally and externally, Chris. So if enough people keep telling me it may eventuate some stage, but I'm just happy that I could get my internet connection to work, because the thought of having 5G out here is still not on the cards. So good to be able to connect, and who knows? Yeah, lots more interesting short stories to share. I've already, after a week and a half on the ground here, I've got about a dozen crazy stories that have certainly added some spice to the life, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Well, there's been a lot of stories in the sports broadcast space as well. So some of these we'd wanted to talk about, and then, life changes and throws curveballs and you move to Jamaica. So we'll jump straight into it. And I guess one of the biggest ones, and interestingly, from the time we actually picked up this story, there's actually been some further news, and that is the ongoing saga, drama, story around what Disney's looking to do at the ESPN. And when we originally wanted to talk about this, it was sort of revealed that Disney was looking at potentially securing some strategic partners for its new sports division, and essentially also looking at kind of how they were going to meld the two services between ESPN Plus with the main ESPN network. And that was kind of the first bit of who potentially would be the appropriate person to look and take on this partnership. But then it's continued, more news has come out, and more recently, I think just last week, although there's been all these rumors about ESPN going to a dedicated streaming service, we just never really knew when, but it seems like Bob Iger is sort of planted his flag and said it will happen as early as 2025. So, you know, we look at these two different ways, Nick. You know, from the partnership side, you know, where this makes sense, who potentially would come in to make such a deal, and then sort of the evolution of ESPN really staking their claim that they're really going to make this push to D2C.
Look, I think this is such an important story. It's been going on for a long time. Like, when's ESPN going to pull the trigger? But just ESPN is such a powerhouse sports broadcaster. They are really the benchmark for the world, right? So if they make this move, it is really a tentpole moment for the industry to go, okay, it's now, the shift has officially happened. We're now here. At the moment, we're inching forward into the new streaming world. Like, streaming's going nuts, and the consumption numbers, particularly in markets like the US, are off the charts. But ESPN are waiting for that moment because of the incredible revenues they generate through cable, right? So the fact that they have now said that this is going to happen, it's going to happen within 2 years, 2 years being the latest, is super significant because obviously they are such an incredible amount of revenue still coming from that cable revenue channel. Are they really going to step away from that? I can't imagine they will step away from it completely. They'll probably find some sort of middle ground, but it's a pretty significant moment. It could be a really significant moment, depending on if they do just, you know, turn the switch off on the cable offering, which I doubt, and then go all in on the streaming offering. I mean, the question marks really are going to be, okay, does ESPN Plus just get molded into the ESPN network offering? They have a lot of exclusive deals with UFC, PGA Tour that sit within the ESPN Plus product. Will that just become part of the existing service? Seems like that would be in everyone's best interest, but will they keep Plus as more of a niche or a more premium proposition? Time will tell on that front, and ultimately how ESPN will be distributed. You know, Disney Plus is one of the main subscription products in the marketplace. Will it continue? Will it just be added into that as an integration in the same way, I suppose, that like maybe Discovery Plus is trying to do with their offerings across the globe? Or will it sit somewhere else completely? Will it sit standalone? Will it be globalized? This whole conversation that they've had around the strategic words of a partner to help them distribute this stuff is really interesting. Would Netflix take this on and go, okay, well, we've just bought our sports business gone from 0 to 100, courtesy of acquiring or finalizing a partnership with ESPN to make all that happen. So, yeah, a lot of question marks still, but I think it's great to see that there's kind of now a final, I wouldn't call it a final tipping point, but a final moment where we go, okay, now the streaming world is real and we're here, and the sports world isn't now sitting on this sort of balancing point. Now we're now all in on the streaming game, particularly in the US.
Well, what I think is interesting in reading the article that our technology editor, Steve McCaskill, wrote was, you know, you think about the bundle's been slowly been falling apart because of all the cord cutting, the Netflixes, the Amazon Primes, HBO Max, and all the other services. ESPN is really kind of, you could say, the one thing that's holding the bundle together, because that's sort of the argument of having the bundle is, yes, there's the entertainment, but really it's probably that ESPN package and the sports that is holding that all together. So it almost leads this whole domino effect of what ends up happening to the bundle. Is ESPN actually the last thing that's holding that sort of bastion of broadcast together? And what happens if ESPN just, like you said, we don't think that's necessarily likely, but if they do, I mean, what does happen to the bundle? Or is that pretty much at that point kind of the end of that generation?
I think one thing we've learned over the last couple of years is that you can't really go direct to consumer alone. You can't do it, really. You need to be bundled in some way, shape, or form, part of something bigger to provide enough value to make it a no-brainer for consumers. Without it, it's a fight. It's a dog fight to try and win audiences and eyeballs. And we're going to have to work with some of the big players. Is it Prime Video? Is it Netflix? Or is it someone? Or is it Apple? Are the obvious names that are getting thrown around? Or is it YouTube even? Who knows with what they're doing with YouTube TV? But you can't do it alone. You have to be bundled in some way, shape, or form. And the comprehensiveness of what ESPN has to offer is second to none. You know, people will use different metrics to compare them to some of the other major public broadcast services in the US from a sports consumption perspective, but no one compares globally in terms of the robustness and the investment they make in sports. So, yeah, I think in many ways they're sitting at the heart and soul of what the traditional bundle was. Now they will probably drive in a huge amount of interest and engagement and shift audiences as and when they pull that trigger with whoever they decide to work with, whether it's Disney or any of the others.
Well, like you and I have kept talking about, Nick, the one thing we need, we just need ESPN globally. Like, to me, like, if you can get that solved, like, take my money. Because that, I mean, granted, I'm an American living abroad. I'm fairly unique, I'd say. But, like, just give me that service. I'm already paying for ESPN Plus. I don't know why I can't access or use 75% of the features that come with it. But if they can just make something, I would love to see a global deal, just selfishly. And, college sports would be great.
You know what? I think the problem has been historically that I've wondered that as well. Like, are we going to see another effort by ESPN to go global again? They have tried. They've been in various markets and evolved and changed shape over the years, and it hasn't really worked. Some markets it has more than others. I mean, even in Disney Star was probably in many ways so Disney's effort in India to tackle that sports market linked with the parent business, and now they've sold that too, or they're selling that part of it too. So it feels like they're set up once they make that move in 25 to maybe rekindle and rethink about going global again. The problem's always going to be coming around to those media rights being so localized, but the NBA, some of the NBA's rights are going to be more available globally. That we've talked about before, the zone NFL Game Pass deal, if that sort of product approach is doable where NFL Game Pass as a product can be shifted into a platform like that, then maybe there's more opportunities to come to globalize again ESPN like never before. So certainly a lot more to happen in that front. It's not just going to be simply shifting themselves over to those networks. I imagine that might be step one, but I think you'll see a lot more steps after that where I can't see them not expanding their business into other markets really.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you did mention, a potential partner there would be Netflix. And something that interestingly has happened this week was we finally had Netflix's, I guess, first foray into broadcasting live sports. Now, whether or not we can call it proper live sports or if it's another take on the celebrity boxing with Misfits, we finally got to see their celebrity golf tournament, the Netflix Cup, bringing together some of the F1 Drive to Survive and what was, oh gosh, Nick, I don't watch golf. Is it Top Shot? Is that what they were doing with their golf documentary they've got on Netflix?
God, I should really know that, shouldn't I? It's not Top Shot. That is the golf the simulator place, I believe, isn't it?
Oh, that is, isn't it?
All
Yeah.
right, we'll do. We can
Full
look. If I
swing.
had a hand
Full
free, I'm holding
swing.
this
Full swing.
swing. That's it.
There we go.
I've really made a mark on us. No, I actually enjoyed that series quite a lot. But there we go. We should really do more research coming into these, Chris.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the problem is like I don't watch F1. I don't watch golf. I love Scott Gutterman at PGA Tour. Love what he's doing from an innovation front. I'm just not a golf guy. But anyways, they did have their first launch of a streaming a live sport. And just, there's been all these different rumors about whether or not Netflix will ever get into this. And, it's not even just a sports front. Is it live streaming in general, even some of their entertainment shows that we've seen? Now, I saw some of the highlights. I'll be honest with you, Nick. It looked incredibly chaotic. I'm not 100% sure what was actually going on. I read some of the reviews. It didn't seem like there were any issues from a streaming or latency perspective, but I think one of the things that was evident is that broadcasting live sports is really difficult. People were talking about the camera angles, how the camera followed the action, some of the audio setup, and probably did demonstrate or gave Netflix some, I guess, insights into how far they actually still need to go if this is a move they want to make in just terms of a logistics and everything that goes into it.
Yeah, I look, Netflix looking at live content. We'll be looking at it completely differently to what a traditional broadcaster probably does. In this instance, because of the crossover marketing they're able to do with both Full Swing and Drive to Survive, they're able to get a huge amount of marketing value out of it, which you can put a number against to justify the investment that they are making and the coverage and exposure it generates through social and the conversation it creates on social media. There's all sorts of extra value they can get out of this. Whereas other content, let's say your classic titles like your Stranger Things and so forth, they've invested to before, they are probably going to be messaged a little bit more empirically on watch time, on subscriber acquisition, etc. But I imagine this sort of project is just as much measured against marketing return, and also gives them a chance to start dipping their toe into the live production game. They didn't have a great effort at it when they did the I think it's called Love Is Blind finale, where that went had a bit pear shaped. And in this instance, a lot of the feedback I had was not around the latency and issues with connectivity, but indeed the production was a bit not fit for purpose. I think I don't know who they used. I don't know whether it was all internal, but things like how the audio was managed wasn't quite right. Things how some of the pictures were almost, it was borderline unwatchable with some of the feedback on social. Now, granted, social can be a little bit dramatic. It's 0 to 100 normally on social. It seems like they have got a lot to learn around production of live content, live sports, but that is no surprise. I do wonder if it's a surprise to them, if there's a bit of it, or whether or not that they did expect it to be rough around the edges. Because if they wanted to be perfect, then they could have used a whole bunch of great production businesses out there to nail it. There's some great organizations, whether it's IMG, NEP, etc., who can deliver those sorts of things. So interesting to do it. I mean, the pictures look pretty incredible with that Vegas sphere in the background looking over them. I don't know if you guys haven't seen it, but check it out on social media. It's something else. But the question is it just the beginning? Will they ever need to start investing into premium live sports? I imagine they will in the future. But for now, they can keep testing. There's speculation and rumors that they're looking at other entertainment-based products now. And you're going to keep hearing a lot of rumors now that they've finally ripped the Band-Aid off of doing live sports.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see. In terms of some of podcasts we did probably about 4 weeks ago, we did a kind of a forecast of the European football, just the health check of how everything was going. And we've had a few news stories that have kind of followed up on that. Some of it's confirmed some of what we potentially assume, but kind of going through it sort of 3 different leagues. We'll kind of start probably the one that's maybe perhaps the most damning or most concerning, which is with Ligue 1 in France. And essentially, they've canceled their auction. We talked about there was a bit of a concern that, Canal Plus, the long-time broadcaster, essentially said, we're not coming back in for this. And we explained some of that was due to maybe some frustrations in the relationship and how the previous negotiations had gone and how some of the rights were sold perhaps maybe under market value. And just basically there never came a real proper sort of bidding war, and the bids that did came in were severely sort of under what they were trying to achieve, which I think was around $1 billion a year. So now they've basically canceled the auction. I'll be honest, Nick, I don't really know what comes next.
Yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon, and actually Serie A was pretty similar, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second. I think it's just a result of couple of years ago, everyone was looking at media rights and expecting it to continue this upwards trajectory. Private equity money came in, and most of the private equity money came in was bankrolled or measured against the growth of media rights revenue that was projected a few years ago. And now, fast forward now, when we've hit a brick wall, and sports broadcasters who are looking to invest into live sports don't need to invest and have the breadth of rights that they perhaps used to. And fundamentally, sports as a needle mover from a traditional live sports perspective isn't playing the same role it did 5+ years ago because of the breadth of entertainment at people's fingertips, right? So there's all sorts of challenges wrapped around this. And also because of the ability for sports and broadcasters to fragment rights now, you're going to see very few broadcasters ever look to get a fully exclusive deal in place. It just doesn't make financial sense these days. The example we've used before, I believe, is that in the UK with Sky Sports, who have enough critical mass on the live games that if you want to subscribe to anything and you want to watch the Premier League, you will have to subscribe to them. They will never need to own 100% of those rights to drive subscription. There is a sort of a tipping point where it's not financially worthwhile to buy any more games, and that I think is just prevalent across the entire live sports and sports rights landscape now. Broadcasters will almost never need to pay and buy up all those rights, particularly for premium sports. The caveat on all that will be, you've got the MLS deal, although that you would argue is probably not a premium property in the same way the NFL, NBA, and the Premier League are. So they are a great test bed to see if that sort of true partnership model can work. But I think the LFP's got a real difficult road ahead to try and get anywhere near the revenues they were hoping to create. The reality is they will not. And then how are they going to adjust accordingly? My guess, they'll be trying to get more games free to air, try and generate more income through sponsorship models and other areas. But the media rights opportunity for them is really capped, as it is with most major sports properties this day and age.
Yeah, it is a tough one, and I think the fragmentation has caused these sorts of different things in terms of just it brought more money in the short term, but probably has done some long term damage. And I think, like I said, I've been slightly pessimistic at times about sort of where sports is headed long term in terms of just the cost of being a fan, whether it's getting to games, whether it's watching games. You take some of that money up front, but long term, are you damaging? What happens when that 14-year-old doesn't become a fan, and those demographics age out. So I don't think it's unique to them. I think there's going to be lots of people that are going to have to deal with this, and we're going to talk about some other organizations that are in fact having to deal with this. And it kind of leads us on to Serie A in Italy. Now they have seemingly sort of concluded their next set of rights, which is going to keep them almost what seems like status quo from what they were before, with a balance of the majority of it going to DAZN and the rest going to Sky Italy. But it does sort of represent maybe perhaps a disappointment for them in the sense of they've not actually gone out and been able to secure more money, that they're pretty much almost staying as a status quo. And I would say, that's probably maybe best case scenario, because I at least think, Nick, that we're probably getting to a point outside of maybe a few of the really truly big leagues. We probably have hit that ceiling.
Yeah, for sure. I think what the outcome is with Serie A is probably about as good as it could have been, in spite of what their ambitions were. I think that's always the challenge in this industry now, as the tide is shifting so quickly, is expectations have to match reality, and they haven't been a lot across our industry, particularly in football, where there is so much financial pressure coming from all different angles. And you think about the wage to turnover ratios that exist in across most of the major leagues. People are spending more money than they should be to run a viable business model, because they're expecting just the growth of those clubs to continue in the trajectory they have, which means that they can spend what they like, and in the end they'll get the return they want when they look to sell their organizations. But that is not playing out the way that I think many investors thought it would. I mean, look, DAZN have guaranteed a minimum amount of revenue. I think it's something like 700 million euros per season. There's also a rev share component towards the end of that deal, which is interesting around subscription performance. So there will be a bit of a rev share, a joint share and risk, I suppose, in some ways, with what DAZN and what Serie A is doing, and some upside, I suppose, on those numbers if it does really work. Sky Italia have a bit around something like 200 a season. So there's some decent money being there, but it's definitely not aligned with what the expectations were going into this sort of media rights cycle. So actually, I think the feedback from some of the owners were they were not particularly. Some of them weren't particularly happy with accepting. Although I think the majority, by the vast majority, did accept the deals that were on the table. There was a couple that thought we should have gone direct to consumer instead, which sounds great on paper, but I think it's probably still too early for them to really go for it yet.
Well, it's interesting because you just brought up the question I wanted to ask, which is thinking back to our friends at PAOK TV in Greece. If you haven't listened to that podcast, please go back. PAOK, PAOK. Great interview with our friend Pinatas, who we'll see out in Madrid, basically talking about how they didn't get the offer they wanted from the broadcaster, so they decided to go D2C. And 12 months later on, they ended up getting the offer that they wanted. And, with this D2C, we've talked about this, Nick, there's the famous tweet that goes out from TalkSport UK. I think it was the former Crystal Palace owner or something like that, saying the Premier League would make $10 billion a year if it just had a D2C platform. And we've pretty much sort of poked holes in that argument as to why that wouldn't be possible. But are we getting to a point, at least maybe for League One, to say they maybe do need to consider that? Or as you say, are we actually still probably too far away from someone of that scale pulling off that kind of move?
I think it's too early still, because also I think people underappreciate how difficult marketing and subscriber acquisition is, and to expect now, again, not only clubs are having more of a direct relationship with fans, but then to say, now you've got to go and secure subscribers, keep your churn rates low, and build a relationship with your fans in a different way. All sorts of new pressure comes on those clubs to deliver against it. And I just don't think most of them are built for it, particularly not the small clubs, let alone the bigger ones. So typically, I think you would expect this whole direct-to-consumer concept to probably start with a league first, because they can at least centralize that effort and the energy and the finances and resources. But I do believe still quite vehemently that people are going to subscribe to a club-based subscription much more likely than they would to a league-based subscription as a first port of call. At the moment, the model is back to front, and I think that will need to change at some stage. but I just think we're going to have to wait and see a bit more time before we get to that point.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that. I think it's one of the things Major League Baseball has done, which I think is a great way. And I think the NBA does it as well, as you're talking about there, Nick, in terms of putting or providing an option for people to just subscribe to the single team. Now, it might help that baseball's got 162 games and the NBA's got 82 games, where you can probably justify that cost for a single team. I don't know if a league that has not quite as many games can potentially pull off that sort of move. But, moving into another league, one that's hopefully or looking to have a bit more success, would be the Premier League itself. And one of the news stories that we wanted to talk about is that the Premier League is looking to expand the amount of matches it currently has. Now, if anyone that's listened to the podcast, you'll know I'm not a fan of the fact that the Premier League only legally in the UK offers 52% of their games to fans. But there's now rumors, or I guess confirmation of the fact in the next set of negotiations, they're going to up that number from 200 matches a year to 270. It seems like that will mostly be fit around that current existing Amazon package, where it's some of those special offerings around certain times of the year. And I believe that's currently going at about 90 million pounds a year. And they're hoping with the expanded amount of games, that's going to rise to 300 pounds a year annually. And it is interesting because I think we've said the Premier League is about the only league in the world that makes more money internationally than it does domestically. So certainly, while there are some healthy signs of growth for them, there is some concern about kind of what is happening from a domestic side of things. So with these expanded games, Nick, you've touched on it before. More games doesn't always necessarily mean more money when you start dividing it out on a per game basis. But is this something that just seems like it's going to have to happen because of the pressures of having to raise money, but also the pressures from fans saying that we're just simply not being offered enough?
Yeah, I mean, we're in a unique situation, right? Because of the legacy of that 3 p.m. blackout here in the UK, that here in the UK, I don't live in the UK anymore.
Yeah.
They're in the UK. That they can continue. They're one of the unique situations that domestically they can, outside of the US, of course, that they can continue to grow media rights revenues because they have a load of games still not on broadcast. And so they can be very careful and smart with how they approach it. Ultimately, you're going to see probably more fragmentation again. You're probably going to see, I mean, it'd be a shock if DAZN weren't trying to get a package appropriate for them. Amazon's historical deal is pretty low at a low price point. So again, you would expect both the Premier League and indeed Amazon will probably be wanting more of that. And what's interesting, I think, from an Amazon perspective is outside of the Thursday night football move they did in the US, it was really the big move, right? Literally the $1 billion move, or the $10 billion move that they made. So could they come and shock us with a huge bid to take a lion's share of rights, or a set of rights that would make them a destination like they have with Thursday night football? I think they would love that. I know that's something when talking to Marie Donoghue that was definitely on their radar, is creating those moments that drives significant eyeballs and attention and connectivity with their brand. But my guess is you're going to see you probably see Amazon, you probably see DAZN take a few more rights. You'll see Warner Brothers or Discovery, TNT Sports, I should say, and Sky Sports take similar packages from last time around. Sky's in a unique situation now where, because they have this incredible deal with the lower tier football leagues, that if they were to actually keep the same or even reduce some of their games in the Premier League, I don't think it would hurt them nearly as much as it would hurt anyone else, because they have such a critical mass of football matches in the UK. That being said, they will still want to be the home of UK football, and so they will aim for at least the majority, at least that more than anyone else. That is for sure. But I think they can be much more crafty than perhaps before, where there was even more pressure on to keep such a huge a proportion of those rights. Now they can be a little bit more selective, I think.
Well, we'll stick with Amazon because one of the other stories we wanted to talk about is around them. But we're flipping back across the pond to the NBA, who are going to be the next big set of rights holders in the States to have their negotiation deals. And everyone is essentially expecting that one to be significantly more than the last rights cycle. They've currently got, their existing relationship with TNT, which I imagine most people think will probably stay, just given the good equity that's been built up over the time there. They've also got different agreements with Disney and ESPN. But there are rumors that Amazon would like to replicate a similar move that they've done with the NFL and create a kind of a Thursday night NBA package, which would be interesting in itself to almost maybe perhaps just make Amazon, that's kind of their thing. They're never going to be the one that has the majority of everything, but they've got a specific package, a specific thing across all of their sports portfolio that's where it lines up. So I don't know, Nick, for you, if you think perhaps a little bit more about the NBA side of things, if they're going to be going more digital, will they be looking at doing something, akin to what the NFL's done with DAZN and having a kind of a more organized international package? There's lots of different things to unpack with the NBA, including what Amazon's potentially looking to do.
I mean, what's interesting, from what I understand, there's been a lot of talk about this NBA media rights cycle for some time, particularly after the NFL deal, because the NFL deals collectively blew everyone away at the scale of them. But also, the NBA hasn't really actually been able to actively negotiate on these deals with some of the new parties, because there's been a window of time where TNT or Warner Brothers Discovery and ESPN have exclusive rights negotiation or a window in place where no one else can negotiate with them definitively. I'm sure they're having loads of informal conversations, though, to give shape and direction. But ultimately, the NBA is seen and wants to be seen as one of the more innovative leagues, particularly in the US, but indeed the world. They will definitely be interested in looking at bringing in, I'd say, at least one or two major streaming partners into the mix to expand their breadth of partners and expand their reach, and set themselves up for longer term success. Building, you've seen the NFL do that in the last cycle. The previous one is they wanted to get the Amazon involved in some way, shape, or form, build that relationship, and then start building and building and building with them. And the NBA is probably as good as doing that as possible. You have this in-season tournament that's just been released. I'd expect that to be, there's going to be global rights available for that sort of proposition. Who knows? It would make some sense if Apple wanted to make a move finally for someone else, that they would take that because of the globality of those rights. So I'm excited to see what the NBA do. I'm kind of hoping that they're going to really push the boat out or do something quite innovative, because they've really set the bar high in terms of their perception in this market for being the guys that do that sort of thing. So time will tell, but I think they're going to see record revenues. They're going to see more partners on board. And obviously, if you throw in the mix or what's happening on a local level with RSNs and so forth, it's really complex for the NBA to find out what that right mix. I don't think they've got the dream probably picture in their heads. You've got a bunch of teams trying to go either direct to consumer or take a more localized approach with their rights now. So it's a very complicated situation for the NBA, but no doubt they'll work out the best case and find a solution.
Well, Nick, it's been a very international episode. Myself in London, you in Jamaica. We've talked about news in the States. We've talked about news across Europe. But now we're going to go slightly in a different direction and talk about news over in India, a market that we've spent some time talking about. Guests such as Sanjog coming with us to talk about what they're doing at Disney Star. Arti Dabas talking about some of her time working in that market within cricket. But now there's more stories following kind of Disney and that whole area, that they're looking to get rid of some of their Disney Star business. And part of this could be directly related to the fact that Disney Star did lose out on some of the rights to the IPL. But why is this something, perhaps, Nick, that we should be considering or something that people should be thinking about?
Well, look, I mean, there's a lot to follow in the India market, and we've been trying to do a bit of that this year because the numbers are staggering, both from a financial perspective and also an audience perspective. I think I saw numbers from Sunil, who's at the ICC, the media rights director, that the recent semi-final with, I think it's New Zealand and India in the World Cup, had 53 million concurrent viewers watching it free. I think, I'm guessing, free to air, just for lots of just insane numbers, right? Just insane numbers. So the audiences are still there. Cricket is still an incredibly important sport in the whole infrastructure of India. So we're following it pretty closely. Now, the deal with Disney Star and being acquired by Reliance, I think is an interesting one, mainly from the fact that Disney have been making a lot of sounds and noises that they were up for sale, or Disney Star was going to be up for sale. What this does is it takes away a bit of the competition in that market. So I would think as a result of that, it means that the IPL cannot expect anywhere near the increase in media rights revenues that it saw in the last cycle, which were off the charts. But I struggle to see that happening now, when basically the two major players in that market are becoming one. Normally just means less competition, means less less competitive pressure means less likely to overbid for those rights. So that's the main thing I took away from it. Is I think it means a bit of consolidation on and some cost savings. It means that audiences are sitting with one major player in that market. I don't know if there's anything to do with in certain markets. I'm not sure. I'm forgetting the terminology here, but when you see two major players merge together, that normally there's some review that needs to be happening at a governmental level. I'm not sure that's going to be something that needs to play out because of the scale. But all it means really is that I think that the IPL can't expect the same sort of growth it has has had in the previous cycle. But I don't think they're going to rush to merge those platforms in the next couple of years. Once they get the deal done, it'll just take time for them to move and migrate audiences as and when they see fit.
Now, Nick, I am going to take you a little off piece because this is not something we spoke about, but I saw you post about it on LinkedIn, and I thought it was an interesting conversation, something for us to follow up on because we have touched on it before, is around DAZN's choice, their bit of their U-turn in terms of how they were going to go about broadcasting the Women's Champions League. And we talked about, would this be the opportunity to finally make that work? And I think an interesting story that also came up last week was the NWSL in the USA, which happened, I believe, sign a $240 million a deal, $240 million deal over 4 years, which is $60 million a season, which someone else has done the math for me, which is apparently a 40-fold increase on their previous deal. And some of that is going to be on CBS Sports, their pay TV channels, Paramount Plus. Some will be on free to air. But, perhaps just talking from a women's football perspective, the DAZN side of things, we were talking about, is this the moment that we could finally push to have this a paid model as opposed to having to do everything free to air? And then maybe a little bit just how we're seeing it slightly differently on the other side of the pond with the NWSL deal.
Yeah, so I mean, just as a quick recap again, so DAZN have a deal in place with YouTube and UEFA to have the UEFA Women's Champions League rights, and this year they were looking to put the majority of those games, I think 2/3 roughly, behind the DAZN paywall. And what they've decided to do is take, and that was when I spoke to people both in DAZN and in around DAZN and women's sports, there was some real uncertainty, I suppose, as to what was going to play out. Well, they didn't say it, but you could definitely feel it. And I think what they've done here is what they're going to do is they're not just going to go, okay, we're just going to make it free and we'll see what happens. I've actually seen on LinkedIn just yesterday, they are advertising for a sponsorship director for women's football on DAZN. Basically, what they're saying is they're going to try and generate revenue through advertising and sponsorship, and they believe that model will generate more income than trying to sell subscriptions. So ultimately, that is a bit of a litmus test. They will know better than anyone really what can drive audiences and what sort of subscription results they would probably be expecting off the back of a set of rights. They've determined that they'd be better off with going out to market basically one-to-one almost to try and sell positioning along those games instead. And you know what? I think it does make a truckload of sense. I think it's good for the UEFA Women's Champions League and for women's football to continue to have expanded exposure because it's been doing well. It's been getting eyeballs. It's still only early stages, but I think that's much more of makes a lot more financial sense and a lot more awareness sense for everyone involved. But my point is that I've made sort of on social is I am disappointed that they're doing it for this pure sense of I wanted to see if it could work, because if it could work, it would open up the floodgates for way more investment into other women's football properties, which would be great to see, because it would just mean that obviously more money was being distributed to more sports properties generally. Like take away the women's component of it, just sports properties that are that's more niche or more have a smaller audience base. Can they move the needle enough to drive media rights investment from broadcasters? That's what I'm really looking to see. And so we're not going to see it in this instance. And I do think it makes a lot of business sense. I just wish they did it for our own purposes and for us to be able to talk about it on the pod in a 6 to 12 months time.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, the NWSL deal is interesting in the sense it's 4 years long, and I know 60 million doesn't seem $60 million a year does not seem a ton of money compared to when we're speaking about things like the NFL and Major League Baseball and the NBA and the other sports over there. But it's not small money, and I think also the fact that it's a 4-year deal provides a little bit of security, and I think it'd be interesting from our podcast we did with Chris Hurst with the Women's Sports Trust, one of the biggest complaints was just the technology being used to broadcast it. But having to deal with Amazon, CBS, ESPN, you would like to think the coverage is going to match some of that. So it'd be really interesting to see with those major broadcasters, with the length of the deal, the increase financially, if some of those complaints that have come out about just how much are people putting in to promote it, to broadcast it at a high level, if that does have return in terms of the overall growth of people that are outside of the standard fan base.
Yeah, completely. I mean, rewinding a few years ago, what the NWSL did at the time, if I remember correctly, was they did that deal with CBS. I think you said the numbers there, a couple of million a year at best. And they also distributed globally on Twitch. Now, that was, a lot of excitement around that deal, but I don't think it really worked for them. And in fact, Twitch has really stepped back away from sports, from what I understand. I don't think they're making many inroads into it like they were a few years ago. This becomes, puts them into a much more traditional, I suppose, sports rights approach, whereas before they were trying to find ways of creating new opportunities, which is quite common for a challenger sports property to do. So, it puts them in a much more comfortable position, and they can then build those relationships with broadcasters and hope to continue to get more value out of them.
Absolutely. Well, Nick, it's a pleasure to have you back. I hope you continue to enjoy the weather once the rain stops. I imagine a tropical climate like that, it probably does rain every day, but I'm sure there's plenty of sunshine. And I'm sure our viewers are glad to have you back because it's been a little bit lonely with just me.
Good to be back, Chris. I mean, obviously, I'm really gutted that because of this move that I actually won't be getting out to Sports Pro Madrid this year, because it is looking like a great event with some incredible people there, and a lot of people we've been talking about even on today's pod will be on display out there in Madrid. So you'll be on the ground there, catching up with Stream Time listeners and indeed the audience there. We're looking at record numbers and attending that event, but I'm gutted I won't be there for this year because, just quite frankly, family, getting people settled and little kids getting them settled isn't really good time for me to sort of just jet away when we're a couple of weeks in. But look, good to catch up, and look forward to catching up again on the next pod.
Before you go, myself and Nick would just like to thank you for tuning into this episode of Stream Time. If you found the episode insightful, please make sure you like and subscribe on whichever platform you listen to. As a growing podcast, we'd greatly appreciate your support in sharing or writing a review. Ultimately, we want this podcast to not only entertain you, but also hopefully help you navigate the digital sports landscape. If you have any feedback on previous episodes or any topics and speakers you'd like to hear from in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find myself and Nick Meacham on LinkedIn or on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @SportsProChris1. Nick can be found @SportsProNick. Of course, if you want to stay fully up to date on the sports business news cycle, please make sure to visit the Sports Pro Media website or sign up to one of our several newsletters to make sure you don't miss anything. Once again, thank you, and we look forward to you joining us next week on the Stream Time podcast.